copy the link. And I think we are live. Welcome to Atheist Edge. We've got a lot of people today and a lot of knowledge in this. Everyone here, I think everyone here speaks at least as an expert as far as experience, as far as personal experience with having done hallucinogenic, psychotropic, or psychedelic drugs. And at least half of us have some experience with the chemistry behind it. We got the history behind it with RJ. So we're just going to roll right into it. Here's all four hosts of Atheist Edge. You don't see that every day. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you
yes.
fine.
What we'll do is we'll go round table. We're going to start with Jim Majors. We'll end with Lori Kays. And just give us a brief background and plug. Where can we find you online? If background, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And then once we get to that, I'm going to just give you a 3-minute quick little a conversation starter from Terrence McKenna. And then we're going to let our guest of honor, Kafei, he's our only believer here. We're going to let him talk a little bit, and then we're going to roll right into it from there. So we'll start with Jim Majors.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jim Majors. Thanks so much, Jim, for having me. This is going to be an awesome conversation. I am also known as the Disciple of Kairos. You can find me on YouTube. It's Kairos, or you can find me on YouTube at the Jim Majors. I'm an ex-Pentecostal pastor and current Bible critic and atheist, and I do have experience in the field of topic tonight. Thank you again for having me.
And Johnny DriveBye.
Hey, I'm Johnny DriveBye. You can find me on my Johnny DriveBye channel or on my Twitter handle, which is Emperor of the Milky Way Galaxy, Johnny DriveBye. Yeah, I've got experience in this too. I flipped a few cow patties up in Wyoming and found mushrooms underneath it. So. Yeah.
Kafei.
Kafei or Jimmy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I got you.
Okay. Kafei or Jimmy's my real name. I'm pretty much an autodidact in studies of comparative religion. I'm also, I follow the research relative to all these topics very closely. So everything going on at Johns Hopkins and all the research that university has prompted all over the world, I try to keep track of all of that. And I do have experience with psychedelics myself. It's an annual practice for me. My last dose was 16 dried grams of psilocybin mushrooms. And, you know, I try to take it higher every year. I haven't done it this year, but I don't know if I'm just chickening out because it's not an easy experience to do. But I'm looking forward to the conversation. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Awesome. Lori Kays.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Lori Kays. I don't really have any online presence other than my Facebook page, but I've been an atheist since I was about 14. My family was very religious, and I started questioning. They, once I realized they have any answers, I realized I need to look elsewhere. But I've been doing psychedelic drugs. That's really been my pull. Even I smoke maybe a little bit of pot every now and then, but really my pull has always been the psychedelics for probably about the last 15 years. I've tried LSD, psilocybin, I've done MDMA, and each of them have kind of a different experience. So I did study a little bit of biology in college, but I'm in no means an expert in any kind of way. But kind of like RJ was saying when we were speaking earlier about wanting to know all the experiences, I've always been very curious about a lot of different experiences, but I like to experience them for myself personally. So that's just a little bit about me.
And Lori, my apologies. Let me correct that. I had you as an active biologist in the lead-up. So, yeah, my apologies. You do have.
No, that's fine. I just didn't want anybody to think that I was more knowledgeable or more certified than I am.
Okay, so what I'll do now, I'm just going to give you my little spiel. Leading up to this, before we went live, we tried to set Kafei a little bit at ease that we're not going to gang up on him because he's a believer. And it turned out that RJ and I probably have the point of most contention because I'm going to discuss something by Terrence McKenna, who I am a fan of. I'm sure he studied him way more than I have. He is not a fan of him. So I'm just going to give you a quick conversation starter, and then I'm going to open it up to Kafei to respond to it, and then RJ after that, and then we can just jump in. But the stone date theory is basically this. Sometime between, I'm going to try to not even look at my notes, sometime between 3 million years ago, before we were Homo sapiens, and 300,000 years ago, when we were full-fledged Homo sapiens, somewhere in that window, we came down out of the trees because of probably geographical and environmental reasons. We had to fend for our own safety in the savannas, which prompted a few things, like remaining upright and erect so we could see higher over the grassland. Other things were, we're down on the ground now. We're not foraging in the trees, we're foraging on the ground. What's on the ground? A lot of animal scat. What grows in scat? A lot of beetles, dung beetles, grubs. So flipping animal scat over, animal poop was a source of protein. What also grows in that? Big, large, meaty, protein-filled mushrooms that you can grab, and it just so happens they taste great. They're good source of protein, and when nibbled on in small dosages, it can aid in visual acuity while you're foraging. So you get the added benefit of being able to, you got that extra visual acuity to spot potential predators. Also, arousal. In small dosages, it can be an arousal. It can increase libido in both sexes. It increases. It causes erections in males. It can lead to outbreeding those Homo sapiens that were not eating the mushrooms. Lastly, taken in large dosages, Terence McKenna argues that it really was a catalyst for propelling our use of language and the development of the neocortex, in the fact that before language, he argues that before language was even thought of, way before, there was a thing called glossolalia. I think I'm saying that right, glossolalia. It's just babbling. It's just using those vocal cords and throwing out nonsense gibberish, which had meaning attached to it later on. But high dosages of psilocybin can cause glossolalia, where you just feel like uttering. It may be nonsense, it might be something important, but you feel like talking. So it increased language, creativity. It was in the evolutionary scheme of things, the rapid evolution of our neocortex is there's really, to me, it's the best explanation, because in the evolutionary time frame, we evolved that neocortex, that the higher brain orders, the ability to be aware of our own mortality, the fear of death, religion, all the higher order mental functions came on evolutionarily very quickly. So that's where we'll start. Oh yes, go ahead, Courtney.
So are you arguing that the taking of mushrooms started language?
It was a catalyst to get it going. That's what Terence McKenna argues. It's very compelling to me.
So at least from what I've learned, the higher presence of like protein and like more nutrition for the brain is partly what would have caused that push as well, of like creating more nutrients for the brain with our change in diets from coming down from the trees. At least that's what I've heard. I've never heard an argument of like hallucinogenics.
Yep. There's our starting point though.
But,
yeah. Okay, Kafei. So he's got, let's see. We already got a quick bio on all of you. Yeah, just tell us where you're at as a believer and why we're basically doing this show.
You want me to follow up on that?
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard Paul Stamets' interpretation of, they don't really call it the stone ape theory. He prefers to say hypothesis, because it's not necessarily a theory. It's more speculative. So, it's not necessarily something that's been proven yet. A theory is more something a theory is a hypothesis that has been tested and, demonstrated with facts, whereas this is something more speculative. And you got it right, man. Those numbers are approximately, I think you said 300,000 to 3 million.
Yep, that's right.
Paul says 200 thousand, all the way back to 2 million. But the science is like that. And, we're dealing with these huge, almost unimaginable spans of time. And so you can't imagine that this happened a few times or a few thousand times. This must have been going on for, millions of years. And, they're tripping on these mushrooms for millions and millions of times, and you mentioned, the arousal and all that. That is part of Terence's theory. There is also, he felt that it gave you better hunting habits, better vision, and so forth. But I think those are all trivial in comparison to what he called the third step, which is the mysterium tremendum, the full-blown psychedelic experience of having eaten, the full, or what Terence McKenna used to call the heroic dose. And Paul Stamets thinks that it may contribute to epigenetic neurogenesis. And I don't know if you've seen the studies on psilocybin where they're able to show that psilocybin can cause neurogenesis, new pathways in the brain, new neuronal pathways that help people overcome depression, all sorts of issues, PTSD. It's even been shown in modern studies. And that's what a lot of I don't know if you've noticed, but, I think it's, I forgot which state's about to decriminalize psilocybin, but it's
Colorado.
Colorado. There's one that did it before them, though. I forgot the first one. I don't know if it was because I know there's one that's already they have it done, and there's another one that's about to do it. And it's not because people are outraging. It's because all the science that's being done today, and I don't know if anyone's paying attention to it. I don't know if RJ's followed the stuff going on at Johns Hopkins. It's pretty well established nowadays. It holds roots in the works of William James. It's been elaborated throughout the decades with Stace, Ralph Hood. It's been most refined in this work out of Johns Hopkins, led by Dr. Roland Griffiths and his colleagues, and the team of doctors they have out there that have prompted. They started this research in '99, and they've prompted research all around the world. There's the 2 universities in California. There's multiple universities in the UK right now, that are studying psychedelics because of what's been established at Hopkins. And I feel like a lot of people, like RJ said, he before the show started, that he wasn't really curious about the experience, and that's kind of the meat of the whole point. And they defined this experience very concretely in the study. And I don't know if he's ever heard that experience and or how it's described, because I think he said something like he doesn't have to take psychedelics because he could conjure anything that could possibly happen to him. Therefore, there's no need to do it. So yeah.
Go ahead.
So I don't know. I mean, I actually prepared notes and stuff on how precisely they define this experience in the studies, and I could reel through them very quickly. But I mean, if you want to ask something else or take it in another direction, go for it, man.
Okay, am I muted or not? I'm sorry, I'm trying to do like 3 things at the same time. Okay, right now let's go put a pause button on that, Kafei, and we'll let RJ throw his 2 cents in. Let anyone else that wants to chime in, and then we'll come back to you on some of your data.
I don't think anyone is arguing that various drugs have various influence on the way our brains work. The problem with McKenna's hypothesis is that he didn't establish the various claims that he was making for its potential effects. The bit about glossolalia is an intriguing one because it doesn't look like human language developed from acoustic signals, that the brain circuitry that actually generates language starts out relating to gesturing, which is one of the reasons why we talk with our hands. And only later on did it probably get connected up with making vocal calls. So that's a late hitchhiker. I did some research on the historical evidence on it, and you can certainly trace back various, not just LSD, but other kinds of drug use in human species going back even 50, 60, 70,000 years. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to how long the human species has been around, because that's being pushed back to 300,000 years. And one of the things that surprised me was looking at a map of the particular psilocybin mushroom distribution, Africa is not a place that it grows very much. And there's tiny fragments of it in some areas that might theoretically have been bumped into by hominids, but it doesn't seem to be a strong incidence. Where it really shows up is in the Americas and in the area where Neanderthals were. So it wouldn't, I would think that there would be a better odds of Neanderthals being possibly making use of that, although we don't have any archaeological evidence on it. So the lack of connection across all of Asia, where the Australopithecines eventually spread into as Homo erectus, that next stage, is not correlated with it well. So there's not a great deal of evidence. There's a 2012 paper I was aware of on the neural correlates of psychotropic drugs, and so there's been some preliminary work on that aspect of it. But the argument that it was playing a major role or significant role in the origin of our cognitive architecture and our cultural frame is really speculative. And in all of the literature in here, it's probably as uninteresting in the literature as the aquatic ape hypothesis, which dated back to about the same period. So it looks like a circumstantial argument that was being made by somebody who was very much an advocate of drug usage, but it hasn't shown any traction that I can see in the paleoanthropological thinking. Methane and all the rest, it's not a dominant player in there. Now, maybe there will be a revolution in the future as they get more cognitive literature on here, more physical data on there, but as of the moment, it doesn't look like that's the case.
I can respond to that. I don't know if anyone caught Eisen Lindenberger on Non Sequitur. He was talking about psychedelics, and you mentioned psilocybin. I don't know if you just specifically researched that psychedelic, because Gordon Wasson argued over Terence McKenna that the hallucinogen may have been the Amanita muscaria, not psilocybin. And so that was something they debated. Terence did favor psilocybin over the Amanita. But if you think there's no record of that in Africa, I believe there is record of Amanita. But as far as psilocybin,
oh well, if you have some technical papers on that, yeah, make sure you get them in the links in that so we can follow up on them.
Sure. I mean, there's a few things to address there. I know another. I've listened to just about every Terence recording out there, and I know he did say that. When it came to the glossolalia, he felt in the height of these DMT experiences compelled to make a sound, and it's very similar to the shamans when what they refer to as the icaros, where they have to make a sound where they're kind of compelled to hum or create these sounds of gibberish, because in that state it kind of brings them back to an equilibrium. They may be going off to a deep edge whereas when they start making these sounds, there's also, you mentioned synesthesia earlier. Ayahuasca's commonplace for synesthesia. So what these sounds end up manifesting as visual, scarves through the air and visual, people actually see what they are sounding. And it helps them to come to a kind of place of equilibrium and peace. Of the chaos that's going on, whereas otherwise, without it, they would fall into what seems like an eternal insanity. And I mean, I know Terence would say that he felt that was, contributing to the Stone Ape hypothesis. But it's, it is speculative, and he even, he never treated all these as true. He felt that, because he was associated with this idea that it was the only idea that really people gave him credit for. I mean, a lot of people don't like discussing time wave zero, or where he thought the world was going to end in 2012. But towards the end of Terence's life,
that's some news on whether it ended in 2012.
He had the time wave that he developed out of the I Ching. Had this asymptotic curve that went up to infinity, at the year 2012. But I don't know. Oh yeah, was it? Yeah, 2012. The same date as the supposedly Mayan end date of the calendar. But towards the end of his life, he was reinterpreting it, and I don't think he took it too seriously. If you ask a lot of his close friends, they would say that he put more effort into his the stone hypothesis. He really liked that idea, and I mean, if you look into early culture, there is no doubt that this is what Isaac Lindenberger brought up, that there is evidence of mushrooms in cave art. There is early evidence. Even Jerry Brown, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's traveling across Italy into these very old cathedrals, and he's finding very obvious art of mushrooms everywhere depicted in the stained glass windows and so forth of these buildings that are centuries old. And so, a lot of historians nowadays are really reconsidering whether their basis of religion may have involved the use of these psychedelics. And if it goes back that far, perhaps you've heard of Soma from India. In Hinduism, Hinduism is considered the grandfather religion. It dates back over 10,000 BC. And no historian today has a clue of what so-called Soma is, S-O-M-A. And they speculate that it may have been some sort of psychedelic. Terence would talk about, even in the story of Eden, that the apple, every historian knows that there is no account of an actual apple in the story. It was a fruit of some sort that they say, but they don't know what it was. Well, Terence suggested, well, it may have been a psychedelic. The Edenic myth may have been a memory of some psychedelic, because you remember in the scripture it says, if you eat this, you will become like God. And what do they call these psychedelics? Entheogens, to awaken the divine within. And you become like God when you take a high dose of a psychedelic. And
it does sound a lot like acquired savant syndrome.
Yes, I've heard of Jason Padgett. Maybe, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was mugged one night, and he was in his early 20s. This is a guy that spent his entire time in the gym. He was always chasing after ladies, going to the bar. He's true alpha male. And then all of a sudden, he gets mugged one night. They hit him over the head with some object, and he suffers brain damage on one hemisphere. So the other hemisphere has to compensate, and he acquired savant syndrome. He starts seeing fractals in every direction. He starts saying things that people report very commonplace in the psychedelic experience, but he sees it all the time. And so he went from being this jock guy who didn't give a shit about anything, drinking alcohol, drinking himself to sleep with alcohol every night, to this guy who became obsessed with math.
Beautiful mind.
Beautiful mind. Yeah.
Can we put a bookmark in that? I want to hear from Jim and Lori. So,
you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. I never found Terence McKenna's hypothesis to be completely compelling. I found it to be interesting. I found like he may be onto something in some ways, but overall, as it being a catalyst to the development and this doubling in size of the human brain over what is it, 2 million years, I don't find that to be the catalyst. I've seen studies where monkeys that live in the canopy would have come down in search of these mushrooms, which were visually appealing. They were blue and purple and shiny and looked pretty, and made them trip. But the thing that broke it for me was having done mushrooms myself. Just doing anything over a few grams would just put me in a place where I'm not hunting and gathering shit. Like, I'm not doing anything, so I mean, if anything, I'm just, bait, just food. I don't see myself surviving enough to pass on whatever chemical changes that the psilocybin or whatever hallucinogenic chemical I was ingesting.
Okay.
Lori, where do you stand on this so far?
Well, so far, really, I'm trying to see the correlation with how this relates to psychedelics taking you to God or making you feel more like God, I guess. And, you know, in all of my experiences with that, you know, I can see how somebody might interpret it that way. But to me, I always kind of take it with a grain of salt. Like, you know, I have depression, and it is entirely a chemical thing. It isn't something where, you know, anything to do with anything other than how my brain operates. So when I take a hallucinogen, I take it with a grain of salt and realizing that I'm making my brain and expanding my brain into areas that it doesn't normally go, but I don't take it as more than what it is, I guess. Like the very first experience I had, I was, I think, 16, and I stared into my boyfriend's eyes for like 3 hours because I thought the Statue of Liberty was in his eyes. I mean, obviously the Statue of Liberty was not in his eyes. Just because I see that and think that does not make that realistic. It's just a part of what I was experiencing at the time. And I remember thinking I was brilliant. I wrote this whole long thing, and then I wasn't even writing in one dimension anymore. I'm writing over top of it, thinking that it has a purpose. It had no purpose. I just was tripping. You know, my brain was just doing things that it wasn't used to, the same as if I had a stroke. And, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that psychedelics is the same thing, but it's just how your brain operates. And I find that interesting to kind of manipulate your brain and see the different things it does. But as far as taking it more, I don't know. I don't have enough research about, you know, the authors you've been talking about to really speak to that. I can just speak to my experience.
Okay, so there was so the concept of encephalization has been brought up. It wasn't called that, but that's what it is.
Increased brain size?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're talking about like psychotropics being the catalyst for that, but everything that all the research and all the studies that I've seen have pointed towards the cooking of our food being the catalyst for that.
Right.
What does cooked food give you?
It releases
More fuel.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Because it's protein, right? Like protein is that catalyst, and by cooking our food, it allows us to ingest more and increase that protein intake.
Yeah, it allows the cooking to break down. It allows our bodies to not have to do as much work in breaking down the nutrition of the food,
right?
So that we can use that energy to put more brain power, which caused the start of language. That's,
if I remember correctly, it has to do something with breaking down an outerlying cell wall. And it helps our bodies break that down that much better. I believe. I'm not a biologist.
Yeah.
Chris, you haven't said anything. What's your take on this?
Well, this is not my area of expertise in the slightest. Like I haven't done any drug harder than.
Let's hear your 2 cents.
Well, I was kind of curious. You know, obviously coming at this from the outside. When it was brought up, you know, mushrooms being present in medieval art, cathedrals and stuff like that, and I'm wondering how much of this is. Because I see like shows like Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
Well, they'll say, "Oh, this hieroglyphic kind of looks like an airplane." Therefore, they had some secret communication with advanced technology or something like that. So I'm wondering how much of that is obviously drug related and not people like. Because there are no, to my knowledge, there are no stained glass windows dedicated to mushrooms entirely. They're all dedicated to Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and maybe there's a mushroom at the bottom because it's an environmental detail. I'm just not sure how you tell that these are specifically related to mushrooms as drugs and honoring their position in religion, and how much of this is just mushrooms in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
And even if they were, I mean, that, if anything, I don't know, that doesn't seem to facilitate any reason to me that would mean that it was spiritual. That just means that they were tripping. I'm trying to, just because they put that in their art, if anything, that's like if somebody's like, hey, I have this really great theory, and then they put a bottle of beer in it. Like that doesn't mean that the beer makes that real. I mean, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Beer is pretty fucking awesome.
I mean, it is awesome. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but
and there's another example. fermented alcohol, as a species, we just love generating alcohol drinks, and we make it out of every grain that we can find, and everything that we can ferment, we'll do that. That's a relatively recent behavior. And we built a whole cultural nexus around those things that are in an eye blink. We talk about 10,000 years. That's a blip in the history of our species. That's way after we appeared on the scene as an identifiable species. And so art and the kinds of things, making figurines and representations of stuff, it's not at all clear that if we got into a time machine and went back 190,000 years and looked at any of the human populations on the planet, that they would have what we would call religion or what we would call artistic sensibilities. We don't know. They might. I would be really gobsmacked if they didn't have a grammatical language structure, because of the way tool structures were used. They would have to be able to pass that on and what stories they were telling to each other. There's also the problem of attributing too much to one thing. I really dislike single causation, that you've got massive feedback loops of lots of different elements. So would it surprise me that hominids or our species down in that realm are using psychotropic drugs for certain purposes and getting a big zing out of them and feeding it into their culture? I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. But the origins of our neuroanatomy go way back, so far beyond that, that McKenna, who was coming up with his notions when most of the fossil data wasn't available, we didn't have the neuroscience, we didn't have CAT scannings, he was just seated the pantsing. It was a clever notion, but you got to test it out. And if somebody can come up with better evidence than what we've got, fine. But it doesn't look that way as of 2019.
So you're saying lobsters?
I find it to be a much more compelling hypothesis than scientific creationism. I will say that.
That's not difficult to do, you know.
So was there someone in the chat who was arguing for hallucinogenics as like proof of God or something?
Yeah, Kafei. In fact, this would be a good time to segue into that. Kafei, if you would start off, give us your personal experiences relating to a direct line to God through the use of psychedelic drugs, and then the rest of us can just chime in with our personal experiences, and if there's anything we've experienced that's come close to that. Kafei, can you hear us?
He's muted.
He has to unmute.
Can you unmute him?
While he's unmuting himself.
Okay, I got it. Okay, no, I can definitely do that. And one thing I will say is that I don't know if you guys are aware, but Terrence McKenna actually has a brother, his only brother, who's still alive today, and he does, defend some of these ideas. But he also criticized Terrence. I think he's Terrence's biggest critic, and he considers everything you said, the needs and all that stuff, but he doesn't necessarily reject some of the things Terrence said. I think all these things play a role with each other. I don't think we should exclude one over the other and make it real black and white. But okay, and another point to add, I know Lori was talking about her experiences with psychedelics. I know she mentioned she took MDMA and mushrooms. MDMA is not really considered a classical psychedelic amongst a lot of these professionals in the research. It's considered more an empathogen. It can heighten your emotional sensitivity. The classical psychedelics are more associated with DMT, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, and so forth.
Right, and I have done those as well.
When you take those at a high dose, I heard you give a short description. You said, I've looked into my boyfriend's eyes and I saw the Statue of Liberty. Well, at the higher doses amongst these classical psychedelics, there's something that the researchers call a complete mystical experience. And this is defined, the main core feature. And if you'd like me to go through all the 6 characteristics that are definitive, or the way, in other words, a volunteer must meet characteristics on all 6 of these criteria simultaneously in order to have had the so-called complete mystical experience. But the core feature of it is a unity. It's an intuitive impression of a deeply felt interconnectedness interconnectedness of all people and things, often expressed as all is one, and also experienced as pure consciousness. It's a complete breakdown between the subject-object duality that you experience in your everyday consciousness. So you have you're a subject. I'm the girlfriend. There's my boyfriend. I see this in his eye. They're in the highest mystical state or complete mystical experience, mystical state of consciousness, whatever, what have you. There is no this to compare to a that. Everything is quite literally one from that vantage point. And that's where people have this experience of ego death, where they no longer can, they have a sense of having died. And it is kind of like a death. You die into this experience. And when you come back, when you return to the baseline of consciousness, you're reborn. And when a lot of these people in the studies, for instance, the cancer patients, the terminally ill cancer patients, they once they have this experience, when they come back, they no longer have a fear of death. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Michael Pollan, the author. He wrote a book on this research recently called How to Change Your Mind, and he interviewed some of these people who were involved in the research. Some of them that are no longer alive today because they're terminally ill cancer patients. But there was this one woman that he was trying to record, Dina Baser, and he said that he went to the New Yorker and he reported this. She said that her fear had substantially diminished after this experience. And so the New Yorker fact checkers went back to Dina and said, well, is this true? Did your fear substantially diminish? And she said, no, he got it all wrong. My fear completely was extinguished. It was vanished. It no longer was there. So she was able to experience the rest of her life in content, in peace, instead of being worried every moment for the fear of death, not being able to even have dinner with her family members because she was so afraid of the cancer that was within her that could take her life at any moment. After the experience, that was trivial. She was able to, really take advantage of her last days. And
on the flip side of that, though, I don't think you can say every experience is a positive experience that's going to lead to that. Definitely the last time I had psilocybin was the worst experience of my entire life, and I won't ever do it again.
Definitely, I don't want to.
The worst.
I don't want to make it seem like it's all rainbows and roses, because if you follow this research at all, the very initial pilot study done in '99 at Hopkins had healthy volunteers because they wanted to gauge how they should, use these substances with people. Nowadays, if you want to volunteer, you got to be between the ages of 25 and 70 years old. So if you're 70 years old and you pass all the check marks for someone that's reasonably healthy, you can actually volunteer at that age. I mean, they see no issue with that. These are professionals, but at the same time, there are risks, and there are people part of that pilot study who to this day are seeking psychiatric evaluation, or not evaluation, but psychiatric help because they had such a bad experience.
Well, yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, most of the bad experiences come with these higher dosages. These dosages where you're claiming that people are having these experiences, and the experiences that I suppose that somebody who's spiritual could call spiritual experiences would occur. I've taken several doses of LSD that exceed like around 1,500 micrograms. Very, very high doses.
I know. I totally agree with what you said there, and because there are risks involved in this experience, but at the same time, it does require these higher doses. And when you take these higher doses, one thing Terrence McKenna emphasized was a lot of the veterans will tell you that you learn way more from the bad trips than you do from the good trips. In other words, you don't want to get out unscathed. You don't want, that was just trippy. I saw a few colors. I don't know if you heard Doug Stanhope, the comedian, speak on this, but he said, I've done
the drugs.
Yeah, he said, don't just eat a few stems and see colors. Eat the whole bag and see God for once in your life. Not a God.
It's that word God that bothers me. Because we're using the term defined.
Well, I want to make it clear that I'm quoting the comedian. Don't take that too seriously.
Right. But the word's been bandied about, and let's temporarily use a placeholder term, spurgle, to refer to potential supernatural entities or the like. It sounds like the Spurgles are open to a class action suit for failing to put warning labels on all little organisms to tell us, warnings if used at certain levels or not. Hand raise.
Yeah. I guess Courtney's got me trained. When we first started the show 2 years ago, I used to be a huge interrupter. So now I just do this, but it's awkward. It's funny. I don't know. Anyway, I totally forgot about Johnny. He hasn't said a word. I just wanted him to chime in his 2 cents.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know. In my experiences when I first did LSD, I was playing pool, and I have to say there was something that I could see the tangents in the shots or whatever, and I got better at pool after that. but that's why I think there's something to do with the clairvoyant savant thing.
When you were saying about that, that's actually an intriguing question about seeing the tangents in the shot. Was your perception of it changing in terms of your visualization? Did you literally have a sense of where the thing is going to go?
I didn't have to think about it after that.
You were one with the ball.
Yeah, something like that. I could
So
see it.
that links to the idea of visual acuity or spatial awareness, maybe?
No, I think the best explanation for that is, I mentioned earlier, this collapse between the subject-object dichotomy that we have in our experiences, where you perceive everything as one. Often mystics or theologians, philosophers, after they have something when one side of your brain shuts down and the other part kicks in a little bit more, and you're using something different. It could be all of that. It could be all of that. But
like an infant is instantly learning. Could it be something like that, where you're in that stage of learning or whatever, where everything's absorbed?
The way I've come to define it is kind of like a very fundamental shift in your perception, like a very fundamental transformation of your perception. And when mystics come back from it, they no longer see God as some entity that's out there up in the clouds or outside of space and time, and that's messing with everything. When the subject-object duality collapses, they come back with a panentheistic understanding of God, a panentheist. In other words, they see for them there is nothing that is not God. But
they went into the experience believing in that, correct?
Not necessarily. If you're
a mystic, you probably go into that thinking that.
Yes.
You don't start off being Joe Regular and come out a mystic.
I agree, but there are certain points to be made about that. For instance, I was on Talk Even the last time, and I was talking about the studies out of Johns Hopkins where they had atheist volunteers who reported this so-called God encounter experience. And when they were asked, well, did you expect to experience that? Or they said no. They had no expectation for that. One thing, I think a lot of people confuse themselves over the word God. There's so many connotations attached to this word. Atheists, if you think about it, an atheist is someone defined as a person who disbelieves or lacks a belief in God, right? But if you think about it, this is one point I brought up on Steve McRae's channel once, that if you believe in evolution, then you believe that the word God hasn't always existed forever. It's something that found its way into our language at some point. And so what the research I think is saying is they tie this to the perennial philosophy, which is it's a perspective on the religions where they see as these fundamental experiences with the so-called philosophical absolute as being the very basis for all the major religions. So wherever in culture that this manifests, this experience that transcends one's personality, that particular culture will develop a name for it. So long before anyone ever uttered the word God, Hindus were saying Brahman, Buddhists were saying Nirvana, and then sometime along Christians came along, and Jews and Hebrews and so forth, and they started saying God.
But those terms cannot be equivocated.
Right.
Those things.
I agree, but I think there is a certain mystical interpretation of these terms, and then there's what we see today, I think, in apologetics, which is, this idea that God is something, for the first 1,000 years of AD after the so-called death of Christ, It was forbidden. It was blasphemy to even try to paint the divine. You couldn't.
So, what is your definition of God then?
I mean, if I had to put it in words, it would be a philosophical absolute, but I don't think it's necessarily that can be put in words, because as long as you're thinking in terms of words and concepts, you're not thinking of God, because God is not a word or a concept. It's not
but if you never concretely define a thing that you're talking about, you can define it into existence in any instance you want.
Sure, but
So are you saying that you are not able to conceptualize this God?
Yes, you're not able to conceptualialize. You can have
meaningless.
Then how do you know enough about this God?
Well, here's what I'm saying. You can to a degree put it in a conceptualization. I think that's what Brahman means, or the philosophical absolute. That's a conception of it. But the conception will always be a symbol, a reflection, something that is not it. It's something that reflects it, that expresses it, that represents it. But to experience it directly is what all the major religions emphasizes, which is a direct experience. Buddhism emphasizes nirvana. Christianity emphasizes theoria. No.
What is the neuroscience on it?
I just have a question. So you were talking about this kind of evolutionary eventuality about a religious identification, and so are you saying that God would have there had to be some sort of source that started through evolution, or that human beings are just evolved to believe in that sort of thing and go along with that kind of thinking because of our psychology?
In the discussion with Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty, there was a real interesting someone in the audience asked to Jordan Peterson, just to clarify what you mean by God. If everyone on the planet were to disappear right now, would God still exist? And you're kind of asking that in a different way.
No, you're not answering my question.
No.
What you were saying was that according to evolution, that you said something about God kind of coming about, like having to have come about. And what I'm asking is, are you saying that's like an evolution of an actual entity, or the evolution of our way of thinking toward like agency and cognitive?
Are you saying? Well, I'm definitely not saying that whenever the word God appeared, that's when God appeared.
Okay, so I think what she's saying is, if you look back in time and you see the concept of God and what God represented, it meant so much more back then than it did now. God covers much wider range of things. The God explained thunder and the rain and the changing of the seasons and the rising and falling of the sun. So are you saying that our concept of God evolved, or that God itself evolved?
No, within the perspective of the perennial philosophy, God is not some idea that evolves. It's not anything that evolves. It's something rather that's recognized. And it's recognized within these direct experiences at the height of these mystical visions.
But that is an assumption early on, not to be the cause of thunder and the cause of floods and things like that.
Well, I believe at the same time there has been misconceptions. If you consider this, a lot of we were talking about, okay, these are the state of drugs. Well, a lot of these professionals will say that they can mimic with the psychedelics what happens naturally through meditation or asceticism. So it's not necessarily that requires the psychedelic. It's a potential in consciousness that's kind of, I guess, in a way, always there. It's something that they see more as a feature of consciousness itself. That's what their research is now implicating.
And why not call it that rather than label the God thing on it?
Right. Because if you want to say that God equals being really, really high, then I'm on board with that.
That's not what I'm saying.
Call me God.
I don't mean to simplify it, but I'm.
Well, I mean, you have to be careful not to simplify like that. I think people will get the complete, misconception. I think the drugs are a catalyst for this transformation of perception. They're not necessarily the point. They're not necessarily the God. I think it's more to do with a metanoia, a transformation, a complete transformation of your perspective.
Okay, let's put a
Yeah,
pin
see,
in that.
I see it as a very squishy term, that a Christian is going to be perceiving God as an entity. Hindus perceive gods as entities, and they have lots of them. Buddhists are in a kind of a squishy little zone, the Godhead. It's in a more amorphous notion. Native Americans will have a different concept of it. Aboriginals will have another. There will be some common elements. The drug aspect is filtering your brain to perceive certain aspects of it. Oneness of the universe, lack of self, all of these, which are biophysical results of what happens when you do that. It really deserves a different word than God, because that carries baggage. And so it's immediately getting into trouble with people whose conceptions, Ken Ham's notion of God ain't what you're talking about, and vice versa.
I totally agree with that, man. I think a lot of, like I said earlier, I think too many people overemphasize this word God. There is a Taoist sage that once said, "The name that can be named is not the eternal name." In other words, whenever people recognize this, just because they call it God doesn't mean that doesn't mean it was that's what it was always called. This source, whatever it is that these mystics recognize at the height of these mystical experiences, is truly nameless. Yet it's something that they recognize as eternal.
All right.
So
Jim,
Chris.
Chris had a thing.
No, let's say Chris, Courtney, whatever you got.
Yeah, Chris.
We're gonna circle back around to this. That's interesting as hell.
We had a question.
There is a question in the live chat. There's a non-super chat question about, is God trying to pin him down to, is it an intelligent agent? Okay. But once we get to these two, we'll circle back around to this. The super chat was Jason Ellis wants us to talk about our worst trip, whether or not it has anything to do with spiritual revelation or not. So we're just going to go down the horn and talk about the bad trips and how did it come to. So anyway, Chris.
I was going to ask, and so much of this comes down to perception and recognition of this of what you're calling God. We know that even unaltered by substances, like our perception of things is faulty. It's optical illusions. We can hear things that aren't there. Our senses fail us all the time. And we get around that by comparing with other people and working around that. But with taking these substances, you're taking our already faulty perception and screwing with them even further. So I'm trying to figure out how, and plus we can't compare notes with other people because they're inherently personal. We can't share our trips with other people and compare notes. So I'm trying to figure out if you want to call whatever you're seeing at the end of a trip, if you want to call that God, that's fine. I'm just trying to figure out how you know that what you're experiencing or recognizing or whatever, however you want to call it, is reflective of reality in any way, shape, or form.
Were we talking about our worst trips or no? Or I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up.
In a minute, yeah.
That's okay, Courtney.
I want to know the answer that he has to that.
Kafei, what do you say to that? Just real quick.
All right. Bad trips and how do you know it's true?
Okay. No. We're not at bad trips yet. What Chris was saying.
I mean, I heard him mention that too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, concerning bad trips, I would say that what characterizes in generally a lot of these psychedelic experiences is a battle between ego and the death of the ego. In other words, so if you try to hang on, and it may be possible to hang on even at these very profound trips, you took 600 milligrams of DMT anally or something like that, you still can hang on to your ego. but the shamanic colonic that I mentioned to Aaron Ra, but my one real interesting story that Dr. Bill Richards, man, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but look up his name. He has a lot of interesting stuff to say, but he talks about how he would trip sit back in the 60s when this stuff was legal. A lot of people don't realize that psychedelics were made illegal in 1966. Prior to 1966, all the psychologists and neuroscientists that were all involved with these studies saw it as a very hopeful time. They saw psychedelics that were going to explode, the research of psychology, and then out of nowhere the government shut it down, and all that was just postponed for years to come. But during the time, Bill Richards had an opportunity to dose graduate students legally for research, and there was this one student that he dosed with psilocybin, and this guy burrowed his head in the corner of the couch. And Bill Richards tried to get his attention, but he wasn't the seasoned trip sitter he is today, the legal white coat shaman that he is today, at Johns Hopkins. He was back then just learning about it. And so the guy was burned, his head in the couch. Bill Richards tried to get his attention. He said, "Hey man, are you okay?" But they spoke German. Anyway, 6 to 7 hours passed, and the guy finally stood up on the couch and yelled in German, "I made it!" Good. I don't know how to say it in German, but that was his original language, Bill Richards. But he said the guy explained that throughout the entire trip, he was violently swimming towards a vortex that was trying to take him in. And this is the ego's fight, that, you don't want to die. And a lot of people experience this at the height of these experiences. And what has to happen is you have to let go. In other words, Bill Richards thought that if this guy just let the ego, if he just let the vortex take him in, he probably could have learned something more profound than he would have ever learned in 30 years of psychotherapy in his entire life.
Okay.
Wait
a minute.
Jim.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Question. So
You never answered Chris's
there-
question.
there's this idea that you're kind of putting forth of like these psychedelic drugs giving us some sort of psychology insight.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm really not understanding why that would be a valid insight, because in terms of like experiencing like ranges of experiences, like the range of experience that your brain can conduct, yes.
You were here when when we were just getting to know each other before the show started, and RJ mentioned, he's like, well, I don't really have stuff that I sweep under the carpet of my psyche. There's no dark corner that I have to address. Right? He said something like that, and I think people, when they're confronted with these ego death experiences, they could address their childhood trauma. Bill Richards has had another volunteer who he thought he was going to find out some roots to his African native roots, but he ended up very vividly experiencing some trauma he experienced with his father when he was younger. And he was, but in other words, everything that people sweep under their psyche that they don't want to, they ignore and they don't want to deal with, that all is going to come out flying at you at the height of
okay. So the idea of there being things that are subconscious, not all fields of psychology recognize that as legitimate. That really comes from psychoanalysis, from Freud. And not to discredit that as a field or as a concept, but it's definitely not like completely accepted.
Can I give you an example?
Well, okay, but I do understand what you're saying of there being like accessing memories and hypnosis, or like things that are subconscious that kind of come out when you deal with like psychoanalytic theory or psychoanalytic therapy, things like that. Or free association therapy, stuff like that. So, what troubles me about that is that anything you experience when your brain is on drugs is not necessarily reality. It's just your brain on drugs.
Did you know that of the volunteers in these studies, the majority who meet criteria for what they call the complete mystical experience will endorse that this experience is more real than everyday waking consciousness? That when they come back to this, they actually feel that this reality may be the dream. And,
but that doesn't mean that it's true just because they feel that.
I agree, but another thing that has to be pointed out is that this experience, I don't think is nothing. A lot of these professionals are quick to point out that it's not just about feeling. We're not talking about grand emotion or hiding states of feeling. While that may be very good, it's completely irrelevant to what happens to at the height of these experiences.
Wait. So you said
sorry.
it's not about emotion, but what is it? What is happening? Are you claiming is happening?
Well, in other words, so I speak about this stuff in a lot of threads, especially with atheists, and a lot of the assumptions that I see are like, oh, I've had a mystical experience. I was at the Grand Canyon, or I was in front of Niagara Falls, or I witnessed a birth or a death. That's definitely not what we're talking about.
That wasn't her question, though. Her question was, how is that? If you're not talking about emotions, what are you talking about? If it's not an emotional experience, what is it?
Well, I mean, emotion is involved, but it's not that type of emotion. It's not that type of awe in witnessing a birth or a death. What I was trying to say is that at the height of these experiences, I never went over the 6 criteria, but one of them is a deeply felt positive mood. You could very easily slip into a state of where you feel unconditional love for everyone and everything. And a lot of people may think that's an illusion. I talked to Matt.
No, just take Molly. I mean, that's it's just chemistry.
No, I agree, Jim. But MDMA, even Sam Harris admits that with MDMA, he's had the unconditional love aspect. But that's one aspect of the experience.
Contemplatives, though.
Okay.
He's not talking about substances.
But again, the example that you're listing is still within the column of a feeling. And so what of that 6 would be something that's like tangible, that's replicable, that somebody else can point to and say, yes, this is real. Yes, this is reality.
Well, when I say the 6, I mean that this is what in each one of these studies that have been done at Johns Hopkins, they've invariably found that the majority of their volunteers will meet all 6 phenomenological dimensions that define this experience, that constitute the complete mystical experience.
And what about the ones that don't meet all of them?
Then they consider it impartial or incomplete mystical experience.
Oh well, then why don't what you're looking at maybe is just simply a spectrum of interactions that lead to, in the state where all of those are connecting up, something that people like to do. I wanted to bring up an issue about the meditative state, because they've done neuroscience work on that. And this is independent of what culture you belong to. So if you look at what goes on in the head of a Catholic nun in meditating about God, and a Islamic dervish doing their worship of God and getting into that state, and a Zen Buddhist, and I think they had several other cultures involved. In other words, wildly different conceptions of God. But it turns out the brain systems that are turning on during that are the same ones that are activated during sexual arousal. So it would be that if there's anything that's a reason why our brains like doing that, independent of the content or independent of the structure, that would be one good reason.
Well, you did mention that you have no experience with these altered states. A lot of people don't. I'm not trying to put you down. A lot of people don't. Like I said, it takes a heroic dose. It takes a high dose to have this experience, and not a lot of people are willing to engage that. With psilocybin, you're looking at 6 to 7, 8 hours, and that's perfect for the researchers because they can start in the morning and they can make it home by dinner. If they used LSD, they couldn't do that. LSD lasts for 12 hours minimum, and if they were using professionally and legally, you're looking at overtime for all the researchers on the team. So psilocybin works perfectly in this workaday, research program that they're doing over there at Hopkins. But I mean, a point I wanted to make is that because most people haven't experienced it, they don't understand the taxonomy that goes on, the spectrum. Like you said, it does occur on a spectrum. Some people don't have the full. Some people don't have the full, complete mystical experience. One interesting thing that I would like to point out. And this is a critical point that I would love for people to be more aware of, is that they make a distinction in the research between what they call archetypal and visionary states and what they call the complete mystical experience or the unitive mystical experience. In other words, in the archetypal visionary state, it's very commonplace to see something that addresses you personally. So if you've been a devout Christian your whole life, you may see Christ at the cross. If you've been a devout, Hindu, you may see Shiva. A Sufi mystic may see Muhammad. and so forth.
Right.
And so these very personal imagery occur at the height of these experiences. I wasn't very religious in my life, and in one of my initial experiences, well, in my first experience with this, I saw Bill Hicks at the height of the experience because I wasn't necessarily a religious person, and but these visions can happen. But when you get past that, the detritus of the ego, which is, encountering these visions, like I said, where you're comparing a this to a that. I'm this, I'm looking at that, the Statue of Liberty, Bill Hicks, whatever it is, Gautama, doesn't matter. When you surpass that, there is a place where these experiences do become universal. They're no longer about the content of someone's personal history or memories or lucid dreams or so on and so forth. It's transcendent of their personality. Now you're in a realm where of the unitive mystical experience that is universally expressed at the very core.
Right. So, question.
I'm sorry. I got it.
Like,
okay.
It's really the whole topic that we're doing is these experiences leading to a belief in some sort of actual rendezvous with a supernatural being, right? So
no, I wouldn't say that.
Understand is where we get that from. Your brain is simply on drugs and it's experiencing certain things, and how that translates to this is actually mapping onto a reality external from my experience.
I appreciate that point. I've spoken to Matt Delante about this. He defines the supernatural as that which is not natural, that which defies the laws of physics, and that's definitely not what we're talking about. If you listen to a perennialist like Frithjof Schumann define supernatural, he'll say that the mystical experience is the supernaturally natural kernel of the individual. In other words, they don't perceive it as something that defies the laws of physics. If you even look at the prefix of super, it means not that. It's not like atheism, like the prefix a.
Above or
like not that.
Above
it means transcendent.
No.
And so what these
It means above or outside of.
above, that's synonymous. Above or outside is transcendent of. And in these experiences, what happens is you're transcendent of space and time. This is universally reported. This is part of the complete mystical experience. This is what all the volunteers
demonstrate that
in various ways. They will say, either time froze, or they felt that a sense of being beyond in space and time, or there was a timelessness. But this is invariably reported, and it's not. Matt tried to corner me one time on the show. He said, well, what if Phil did this? And he said, I feel like I'm transcended in space and time. No, the researchers don't interview the volunteer as they're tripping. They interview them after the fact. So
All right.
in that state of consciousness,
we're gonna circle back around to this definitely. We're gonna touch on it again. We'll give Kafei and everyone a chance to just process what we just heard, and we're gonna start with Jim. And the super chat was talk about your bad trip. Well, first off, also try to inject in there anything that we're all non-believers except Kafei. But if there's anything that you consider close to a spiritual experience. So talk about your worst trip and anything that you would maybe describe as bordering on a spiritual experience. We'll start with Jim.
My worst trip had nothing to do with the spiritual experience. Oddly enough, the spiritual experiences were great trips, but my worst trip, I was approaching what they call peak, where it's the height of your trip, where it's the most intense. And for anybody who's done LSD, at the peak of an LSD trip, especially at higher doses, it's very hard to operate, especially whenever you're looking at bright lights or listening to certain types of music that may be too intense to listen to. But I was playing Grand Theft Auto, and I had on my wireless earbud headset, and it had gone into screensaver mode, and I stepped off the back porch to smoke. And sitting back there, I was smoking, and it was probably maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden I hear sirens. I see the windows of my house light up red and blue, and I'm freaking out. I don't know whether to go back inside because I'm on my back porch, and I know they're coming in on the front porch. And then I hear helicopters, and I'm like, well, they're coming for me. And so I took off running. Let me just put you in perspective. I'm wearing knee-high socks and boxers, and that's it. And I start clearing neighbors' fences like a gazelle, just one at fences, and I'm just cruising, right? They're hot on my tail, man. I'm still hearing, woo, stop, get on the ground, and I'm hearing helicopter going overhead, and I make the block via jumping through my neighbors' backyards, and wind back up at a house that looks familiar. And at this point, the cops are right on me. And so I knock on the door opens, and it's my neighbor that lives directly to the left of me. When I left the house, I went to the right. So I had somehow made a circle and wound up back at my neighbor's house. And I said, the cops are after me. You have to let me in. She said, what? And I just ran into her house, ran right past her in my underwear. And luckily, we were great friends. And she was like, Jim, what is going on? Like, what is happening? Like, you have to tell me. And you can't be here if the cops are after you. Like, you need to go. And I was like, but it was so hard to hear what she was saying. It was almost muffled. Like, I felt like there was like water, like I was underwater, could barely hear her. And I was like, what? And she reaches up and she jerks off my headphones, and all of a sudden the sirens stop. No more helicopters. I'm no longer being chased by the police. It was the waiting screen on my Grand Theft Auto game, and that was it. That was the worst trip that I've ever had.
RJ.
RJ has a trip.
Oh gosh, well, since I'm not a drug user. Yeah, I haven't tripped, but I will say that the sort of bad trips I could imagine, I would say I have not yet been to the Ark Encounter.
Yeah. It's so cool that they're suing for flood damage right now. That's so funny.
Yeah, there is or there in the dyslexic case there is a dog.
Yes. Johnny DriveBye and anyone that's not subscribed to what he's got going on over there, go do that right now. Don't leave here. Just minimize the screen and go over to give him some love. But yeah, Johnny.
I don't think I really had a bad trip. I mean, I don't know, but a lot of good trips. Well, pretty much when I did it, I pretty much ate like vitamins for about 6 months. So I think I just got immune to it. But yeah.
Lori.
Yeah. So my worst trip is actually very vivid to me because it wasn't that long ago. It was about, I would say, 2 years ago. It was psilocybin. And ironically enough, it did start with video games. So I feel like we need to have another conversation about hallucinogens and video games and their effects, because that's clearly something. But my husband, he went to our weed dealer, and he had mushrooms, and he's like, usually if he has some hallucinogens that are floating around, he'll pick them up. So he went ahead and picked them up and brought them home. So I wasn't really in the space or anticipating to be tripping. And the last few times I've done mushrooms, it hasn't been too big of a deal. Like, I take them and sure, but it was probably, like I have a higher tolerance, I guess. So it didn't seem like it had that much of a trippy effect on me, I guess. So this time I kind of took more of them, and I was playing the game, and I was thinking it wasn't working, and so that was kind of making me mad because I was like, oh, they're not working, and it put me in a really bad space to start off with. And then it really just snowballed from there. I've also struggled with depression in my adult life, especially a lot to do, and I guess it is somewhat spiritual, but more a lack of spirituality. I was raised very religiously, and so it's something when over the last years, I've kind of come to terms with that, but there's definitely a lot of baggage there as far as, you're raised to believe that you're not really going to die. You're going to go to a place where everything's going to be great and all your friends are going to be there and Jesus is there and the streets are gold and, all that good stuff. So you go from having this vision of like, Jesus is going to come for me, to just realizing that there's nothing. And so it's, I don't know if everybody has different experience with it. But for me, it has been very depressing, even though I've been an atheist now for more of my life than I've ever been Christian. But in the trip, this really was like just very strongly felt this emptiness and just, I've had both my parents, I was born way later in life. So both my parents have died, both my grandparents have died. I've had a lot of really bad experiences, and I guess I don't really emotionally deal with them. I do sweep them under the rug, and all of them came out in this one trip, and it lasted 14 hours, and I couldn't go to sleep, and I couldn't lay down, and I was exhausted, and I was crying the whole time, and my husband was tripping, but he was having a good trip. So he was trying to sort of comfort me, but it was clear that like he wasn't emotionally able to help me in any kind of way. And it was miserable. I remember waking up just feeling like I had gone through like this just harrowing experience. Like I remember at one point saying to him, like, if this is the revelation of my real feelings, I must really hate my life. And I don't know if that's actually true, because I actually do like my life. You know what I mean? I think it's more of a chemical thing in my brain that made me feel that way. Lack of serotonin is really the bottom line. And I feel that more strongly because after that, I started taking Prozac and I'm fine. I don't feel those feelings. I don't feel like a different person. I just don't have those depressed feelings. So that was my worst trip ever. And I probably won't do mushrooms again because I don't feel like that's a good place for me to be.
Is your husband a big video gamer?
Yes, we both are. We both have our own Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, and then we have our own gaming computers. But our Xbox, and we keep a couch and have them side by side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be an interesting variable to look into about the impact of sensory inputs, how much, whether acoustics versus visual, and how that might play out as to how people react to the drug impact.
Absolutely, I think how your mindset is going into it affects it greatly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like Kafei said earlier, that a person who is Hindu is more likely to see, Vishnu or Krishna, and somebody who's Christian is more likely to see the Christian God. And I mean, and for me, that just leads credence all the more to the idea that what you put into it is what you get out of it, and it doesn't have anything to do with any sort of God. It has to do with your with your epistemology and your worldview, and what is at the forefront of your mind.
Imagine too, the hominid using that. They would not have any video game input. They wouldn't have necessarily any musical input. They would be hearing the sounds of nature. They would be experiencing whatever animals are around them. So their landscape, for any putative ones making use of this in pre-human times, would have been very, very different from the kind of experience that we're doing in a cultural framework with lots of baggage and artificial illumination and clothing and all of that.
Yeah.
All right, Chris. Go ahead, Lori.
No, I can concede, and I can see how for Kafei, is it right? Am I saying that right? Kafei?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I can see really how, I think that spirituality has become important to him. So when he has the trip and he goes into his mystical experience, that is something that, like, I don't want to take away from that. Like, if that's what he's experiencing and he feels that, like, I'm fine with that. Do I feel like that's realistic and proof of a deity of some sort? Not to me, but in his own experience, like, I can respect that. Like, I respect that. He went into this feeling, this spirituality, or maybe he wasn't too spiritual at first, and then it kind of came to him after, over time. I can respect that, for what it is, I guess.
I mean, I wouldn't put that down, but I kind of, like I mentioned, the connotations with God. There's also connotations with the word deity. I feel a lot of atheists have this conception of God where if you if you look at the parodies, you find the flying spaghetti monster, you find the magical sky wizard, like we're not the sky daddy and so forth. In other words, whenever I hear this word deity, I think of Einstein. He would say that for him, that was the naive interpretation of religion, that, he didn't recognize that as God. He used Spinoza instead. And if you study comparative religion or the research relative to the perennial philosophy, the very concept of the divine, if you will, is centered around very akin to Spinoza's God.
Spinoza's God is still a deity. It's considered a cosmological deity.
Well, yeah, but you're no longer speaking of deity in the sense of calling some object a god. You know,
But I'm not saying an object. A deity is just any overall, yeah.
Yeah, but one misconception that a lot of people have with Spinoza is they will often think that, oh, well, Spinoza is just renaming nature or the universe God. No, that's a very, very common misconception. He wasn't simply doing that. For his understanding of God was more close or more accurately described as a philosophical absolute. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, but I don't know.
We'll get to that. That we're going to end with that.
Sure.
Chris, you've never done any hallucinogenic drugs at all.
I got drunk once.
Once. I know. All right, Courtney.
I haven't really done psychedelic things either. But I did want to sort of like reiterate in the time that I have what Jim was saying of like the difference from like your own psychological experience, the leap you have to take from it just being that to there being some sort of outside arbiter of that. And I haven't heard anything from Kafei that actually makes that argument to begin with, or offers any evidence for that. But I do want to point out that like the concept of like the matrix, where everything that you experience is the product of your brain, that like it's a really good way of just kind of making that, demonstrating that of like, that really is the way that it is, of this idea that everything we see, everything we feel and smell and taste and touch, everything is signals in our brain, as is our personality and what we put out in the world. That if we like damage a certain part of your brain, then it can completely change the person that you are and the things that you believe and what you're capable of doing, or the personality that you have and all of those things. So there's so much of who we are and what we do and what we experience, all of that is wrapped up in the matter of our brain. And if you alter that with drugs, then it still only remains within your own body. Like that, this is just an expansion of your human experience within your own mind. And it's not at all evidence that anything outside of your body and your experience is influencing that in any real way.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, people make that argument and they don't realize that everything that you experience that you call external reality is happening inside your mind. You know, you're not looking out with your eyes to something out there. You're actually experiencing all the collection of activity that happens at the back of your visual cortex that takes place in the back of your mind. And so it's almost like, you know, all of reality is inside yourself, yet you're embedded in reality. So you have a kind of paradox.
No. Well, outside forces, like your sense of touch is internal, but there's
in other words, you as an organism.
Hold on, man. Hold on. You've talked for a long time, dude. Hold on. Just stop. Hold on. No. Hold on. No, he has though. He has talked for a long time. Yeah. I mean, I'm keeping it civil. But he has. That's the truth of it. So I'm a bit of an objectivist in the sense that Courtney and I slightly part ways in the sense that things happen outside of our perception of them happening. The world exists around us, whether or not we perceive it or not.
I'm gonna try. Okay.
I just like you.
We're jumping the gun just a little bit.
You explained it a little bit differently.
No. All I'm saying is everything that you personally experience is the outside world affecting the chemistry of your brain. So if we were to change the signals that happen and give you the same stimulus, you would experience it differently.
We'll attack this.
That's all I'm saying is that if you have this altered, sense of oneness and stuff like that, that's still the chemicals in your brain responding to a stimulant.
Mm-hmm. Can I respond to that?
Again, but what you said about the the occipital lobe. Like, that's exactly what I was saying. I don't understand where we're
We're
disagreeing.
going to touch on that. Let's finish the bad trips and then bring that up at the end.
But this is the entire reason for the discussion.
I know. Let's just finish the bad trips. We only got 2 more to go, and then bad trips or
Bad, it wasn't bad.
anything that you might consider spiritual.
I honestly, like, I sure hate it for people that have had bad trips. For me, I haven't really had a negative experience when I've done psychotropic drugs. I've only had weird experiences on psychotropic drugs. I haven't necessarily had any negative experience. So one of the things that stands out to me is like, one of the first times I ever tripped on LSD, we had some, what was it? It was a liquid that was made into a gelatin.
Or
It was a liquid that
a
was
sugar cube.
No. It was a liquid that was made into a gelatin.
Window pane.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I know that. Oh,
Yes.
shit.
It was called window pane. Yes, for lack of a better term.
How do I know that?
They didn't come with that.
But it was a gelatinized like.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And you put it on your tongue and it just dissolved and you just like had your fucking trip or whatever. But like the thing that I just noticed about like the experience that I had while I was on it was just when we drove our vehicle that we were all in to a very secluded forested area in our hometown. And we just got out and we opened the doors of the vehicle and we went out into nature. And what I noticed is that I felt like what we were experiencing was like a cartoon. I don't know. There's no other way really to say what we were experiencing, but it felt like we were in like Looney Tunes land or so. Like everything seemed animated. Everything seemed animated to us, and it was
Like Who Killed Roger Rabbit?
Yeah, exactly. When you go to Toontown, when you go to Toontown, that's exactly what it felt like. Or that's the experience. So I mean, I don't consider that negative whatsoever. It was fucking awesome.
That sounds insane.
It was amazing.
That's not a bad trip.
No, it's not a bad trip.
It seems like a pretty low dose though, honestly though.
Experience on hallucinogenic
I feel like
drugs.
I would feel so uncomfortable though.
It was a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
I will say that much.
So we have 20-30 minutes to wrap this up. I'm just going to end with mine, but we're going to go back to Kafei after this. And I've got a way that I might be able to pin him down to a definition. Jason's got some good ideas. He goes by Ralph Ellis in the live chat. He's got some good ideas. I've been looking at him, so I'm going to do that, but I'll talk about mine. So I'm kind of dating myself. I haven't done hallucinogenics since high school, which was the late 80s. It was the late 80s, back when you guys don't remember this, but they were talking about some drugs being legal way back in the late 60s. Ecstasy was still legal when I was in high school. Waitresses here in Dallas were passing around. They were called biscuits. You would just take half of them. They were little squishy biscuits. The waitresses were serving ecstasy at the clubs here in Dallas.
Oh my God.
Those are the days.
I know. Right? Anyway, so I was at a sleepover. I was in just boxer shorts, no shoes, no shirt, and there was mushroom on the pizza. And everyone conveniently forgot to let me know that they were not normal mushrooms. So I ate like 3 slices, tripping balls. I had no idea what's going on. Never done mushrooms before. Walk down the street. There's a 7-Eleven on the end of the street. I walk by myself to 7-Eleven, go in. It's like 2 a.m. I walk in with just boxer shorts, pour a giant 44-ounce big gulp, slam it, don't pay for it. And back then there was stand-up video games in 7-Eleven. Okay. So I'm dating myself again, but Stargate Defender, if you remember that video game.
Defender?
Stargate Defender.
Oh, okay.
Not
regular. We're not that old.
Right. It was a little bit beyond that. So I'm playing that shit. I'm killing it, right? And then he wants this kid, and I can't understand him, and I'm turning, I'm like trying, dude, what? And well, it turns out he was Down syndrome. In my brain, I was thinking he's just messing with me, and I wasn't trying to mock him. I was trying, in my warped brain at the time, I was just trying to speak on his level. So I started fucking like this too. And of course, his big brother, who's fucking twice my size, comes in, thinks I'm mocking him, which I guess I was, but I didn't realize. I was fucking like this, and it was bad. I don't understand what you're saying. And so all I see is a ham hock of a fist about this big. Crack! Lights out. Right? I wake up. What? I see the guy, the employee at 7-Eleven calling. I know he's calling the police, and I don't care. I'm like, whatever, man. And my face, I'm still racked with pain. Yeah. Right? I get back up and I realize my game's still going, so I keep playing. Right? I didn't miss a beat. I mean, I didn't die at all. I still had like at least three lives. So I'm going. The employee comes right and goes, "Hey, man, you have to go. You've been playing this game for like 3 hours without a quarter." I didn't even put a quarter.
Can you imagine?
It wasn't you. No, it was
the demo. It was
no,
the demo.
As soon as he said that, I was looking, and all I'm seeing is the high scores on there. I never even put a quarter in the motherfucker.
Oh my god!
All right, that's fine. Anyway, all right, let me pin down Kafei. We got 20 minutes, and all of you chime in, especially Johnny, and especially Lori and Jim. You've got to get some more out of you guys. So you three focus. Kafei, here's. If you guys got a better way to pin him down, not to put you on the spot or anything, but I got to pin you down on our definition. God. Oh, and Jason said in the live chat, Spinoza was closer to a pantheist than a deist. I tend to agree with him. But I want to ask you, God, is your definition of God a independent, intelligent agent that is capable of making its own decisions? I'm going to try that. What's your answer to that?
Spinoza denied that, and
what do you say?
What do you say?
I agree with him because when you enter to these states, earlier I think Jim mentioned Hinduism and the Shiva, the all the.
Are
different,
you into politics, Kafei?
Only so much as it affects me. But no, most of it I
okay. Well, you're just very good at evading questions. So I just was thinking maybe like you would be really good at that.
I am answering the question.
I seriously, I asked you so many different ways the same question, and I still haven't gotten an answer at all.
Well, here's the answer. Here's the answer to that question.
I mean, but they were specific. Yes.
I was trying to say that Jim brought up, the pantheon of so-called Hindu mythology, but a lot of yogis recognize that Shiva and all these entities expressed as beings, as symbolic.
Okay, but what if we were to just narrow it down to a yes or a no?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. That
no. But see, that's easy because you just say yes or you just say no. Yes, do you believe it's an intellectual being, or are you saying it's not an entity? That's a yes or a no.
I don't think it's boiled down black and white like that. In other words, so you have this Hindu pantheon of Shakti, Shiva, and so forth. But with the mystics, the yogis recognize is what they call Brahman, which is the ultimate concept in Hinduism.
Right? What do you believe?
Yes. Hang on one second. I'm sorry. Hang on. I really don't mean to stop you. I hate interrupting people, but we're not talking about anybody else's conception of God, but except yours.
Yes.
This is all I want to know. So you don't need to compare it to anybody. Assume that we don't know anything about any other deity, and let's address yours. What do you?
Sure. Can I finish? Sure, I agree. In other words, this is my conception. In other words, so the Brahman spoken about as a philosophical absolute is something that these mystics say that they directly experience. So when you talk about things that are inside there, like a consciousness or love, yes, there is a sense of unconditional love. But there is no sense of volition. There is no sense of will. And I think Spinoza rightly point that out because when you have these type of experiences, I mean, I don't know if anyone here has taken a high dose of psychotropics.
So is that a no?
But what happened
Yes and no.
is that there.
I'm just trying to decipher because we're way off.
It's a no, but it's not necessarily that it's not conscious at all.
Okay. Did your God speak the universe into existence?
I believe people
That's a good question.
intuit in these experiences.
Can you say yes or no first, and then you can explain it?
We'll ask the question one more time.
Did your God speak the universe into existence?
Speak. Well, you see, that's kind of a loaded question.
No. Say yes or no first, and then go ahead and expand.
Yes and no.
Son of a.
This is Schrodinger's God.
Right. It can't be both.
It can't be both.
Well, no, I mean, in other words,
It can't be both.
when you say speak into existence, there's so
If
many.
I say hi to you, I didn't yes and no say hi to you. I either said hi to you or I
Okay.
did not say hi to you. That is a
Is your
definitive.
God?
Yes, but my understanding of God is very different from
Is
yours.
your God accurately?
And that's fine, but what is your understanding of God? Not what is ours, not what is Grauman's. What is
And millions of
yours?
people's different explanation of God.
That's what I'm trying to explain. That it's synonymous with all these terms.
Not understanding that we want a yes or no answer.
Guys, this is Atheist Edge. Building bridges,
It's
finding common
fine.
ground. Let's
No,
keep it
we're
simple.
not getting.
But we've
angry.
been
We're
trying this entire time, and we're just
A-
trying to
a-
find.
a yes and no answer wouldn't give you a description of what I think about God.
But we want to have define with a little bit more of like objective, like
Right. Like
And I'm trying to tell you, but you won't let me talk.
Description, okay? I'm not asking for your
Yeah.
idea of a God. What I'm trying to do is establish pie slices that equate together your God. So let's just focus on one slice at a time. So is your God accurately represented in Genesis 1 in the Bible?
Yes, I believe the Christians refer to this a notion of the divine
Okay.
as the Father. Yeah.
Okay. So then you believe that your God is an intelligent agent.
It's. I wouldn't say it's an intelligent agent. Yes, there's an intelligence to it because I don't think you could derive human beings from unintelligent matter. There is that sense of intelligence, but it's not an agent in the sense that it has volition, that it has some kind of will.
Either God himself is an agent or he's acting through an agent in order to create. In order for something to be created, there has to be an agency there. So either your God is creating himself or he's acting through a medium. Which is it?
Well, I think there is a medium, and it has been going on.
And what is that medium?
It's a medium that's been happening eternally.
No. What is the medium through which God created the universe?
What is the medium?
The
through which
universe
God-
hasn't been eternal.
The universe hasn't been eternal, but once to the Dalai Lama, there was a physicist that mentioned the Big Bang, and the Dalai Lama said, "Bang, bang, bang." In other words, it's not just.
Would it bother you? Would it bother you if God weren't eternal?
Well, I mean, the reason why he said that is because the universe is not just one; it's been going on since time immemorial. Since there's been infinite.
That's an assertion. That is a theological assertion.
It is, but it is the Hindu view. That is how they saw
Would
it.
it bother
Okay,
you?
Are you Hindu? And if you're
God
not,
weren't
why are you
eternal?
using a Hindu argument?
I like I said, I believe Brahman is synonymous with what I define as God.
Okay, well, the God of Genesis 1 and the Hindu concept of Brahman are two completely different things. Are you aware that Brahman uses a piece of itself?
Yes, but not according
to entity?
Not according to the perennialist view.
Yes, according to the Vedas, which I've read. Yes,
I've read as well.
Himself to create another entity through which they create the universe.
Are you familiar with the concept of Brahman?
I just demonstrated that, I believe.
Well, the concept of Brahman is spoken as a philosophical absolute. You can think of it as
Not in Hinduism, it's not.
Yes, even in Hinduism.
Is anything not a philosophical absolute?
What I'm trying to say is, from the perennialist perspective, all the major religions have their source in that, and they all have different names for it. In Christianity, it's referred to as the Father. In Hinduism, it's referred to as Brahman. In Buddhism, it's referred to as Nirvana. In Islam, it's the Tawhid or Fana. In Taoism, it's Wu Wei. There's a lot of terms that refer to this.
The cut and paste version of theology.
What's up, Jim?
I mean, not necessarily. I think there's a lot of evidence for it. I mean, it is what our modern science is even hinting towards too.
No.
I just want to hear more of Johnny. Well, you got anything to add to this, or how would you propose we nail Kafei down on his definitions?
It's like nailing Jello.
I think you guys did quite a bit there. I think comparing Hercules and Jesus or something like that, and time swap them with each other in their timelines, and then that might be it.
All right.
Can I get one last?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I get one last? Okay.
Take another stab at it.
My one last stab is just going to reference something that the guy talked about earlier.
Sorry, you got to speak up. We're having mic issues. This one's not working right now, so we're talking right into the laptop.
So you talked about Lawrence Krauss, like you knew what he was referring to when he talked about nothingness. Okay, that's a thing. But look, he wasn't pointing to ex nihilo, which nobody has ever in the history of mankind has ever been able to demonstrate where we look at no thing. There is no such. We have never been able to point to a concept or point to a thing or point to something that's been described as no thing.
I never mentioned.
That's not. It conceptually exists, but we have never been able to objectively describe or prescribe no thing.
I never mentioned Lawrence Krauss, but I want to take one more crack at it, if I may, to try to describe it. I mean, the way the philosophical absolute is understood, aside from all this religious vocabulary, is you see, it's not something that you can necessarily imagine, but I have to put it in words in order for you to even contemplate it. So the best thing I can come up with is, if you can imagine all the underlying permutations that could possibly manifest in the material world, everything that could ever happen in material reality, the summation of that is what's considered the philosophical absolute. So when mystics have these experiences, this is why they describe it as being transcendent of space and time, because they have this sense of having all experience at once. Everything that ever happened, everything that ever has happened and ever will be, it all collapses into a single moment. And so that's why they describe this definition of God as self, with a capital S. Self as all things, but not all things as we know it right now, and as time passing, as nature passing. But
do you feel like that's a bit of a deepity, though?
It sounds like a deepity if you've never had the experience.
Well, yeah,
mystic.
Actually meaningless.
Okay, but we've had the experience. And I know you keep trying to say that we haven't, like you keep trying in many pretty words to say that we haven't actually experienced a trip, but I think most of us have, and we've been to a very deep place, but we don't necessarily think of it as a mystical experience.
When I mentioned the collapse of the subject-object dichotomy, you said that you had this height of an experience where you saw the Statue of Liberty in your boyfriend's eye, whereas
that was one experience.
But have you ever had an experience where that subject-object dichotomy doesn't even exist? It's completely dissolved. There is no me to compare to everything is literally seen as one unity, one organism from that perspective. The entire.
But you can't say that somebody didn't trip or that they weren't at the height of their trip or didn't take enough because of that.
This is what is universally expressed at the height of these experiences. If yes, I am trying to say that if you didn't experience this breakdown between subject-object duality, then no, I'm sorry, you didn't have this experience.
But the thing you're describing, that sense of oneness, yes, that's universal, but that's a suggestion of the effect of the brain or the effect of the drug on the brain, no matter what your
again, psychedelics aren't necessary.
That's a
it doesn't matter. So you're saying that there's a certain level that happens where people experience their own interpretation of their deity, and they'll see that person, and then at a higher dosage, you're going to experience this sense of oneness, which is universally experienced. But again, everybody on this chat has been trying to articulate to you that you have not demonstrated why that experience of oneness is a demonstration of something outside of a personal experience that is only the result of drugs on the brain.
Exactly.
Why should you assume that it'd be outside?
Because that's what you're saying
You're the
is
one
that there's a supernatural
No,
entity.
that's not what I'm saying.
No,
You
you
have to have
I
a
don't
history.
think that you believe in our definition of God. I really think that I think
You
that we
have
all
to
kind of agree on the same thing. You just want to say that yourself is God. If I'm really oversimplifying, but I feel like sometimes you got to break it down to the basics.
Well, that's not what I'm saying, and I mean, no, it's not as it's not as simplistic as that. I've been trying to express.
Do you believe in God?
I was hoping to get people's mind out of that box. Like when you call into the atheist experience, for example, the first thing they tell you, the screeners will tell you, are you atheist or are you theist? And so when I answered neither, it got around to Matt, and Matt took my call and he said, hey, the screeners saw you. They asked you if you're a believer of God or not, and you said neither, and that's impossible. And then we went on to a huge semantic argument after that. And so what I'm trying to get you to see is you even said yourself, we have our own definitions of God, and you don't seem to be agreeing with them. If you have a definition of God, please explain it.
Well, that's what we were trying to clarify.
Well, I mean, we have a definition of God, but it doesn't seem like you do.
I know I do too, but it's completely antipodal to what you're defining as God.
Can
But
I
I haven't
ask a
defined
question?
God, so how do you know that?
Go ahead, RJ.
Yeah, the philosophical absolute, does it care about whether anybody is ever devoured by wolves?
I don't think so. In the sense that there is this sense of mystics encountering the philosophical absolute, but when they encounter it, it's a sense of everything already being there. In other words, the wolves, everything has already happened. It's already there.
Okay, so if you're concerned about being devoured by wolves, the philosophical absolute's no help.
No, it is in this sense. When mystics encounter it, they feel this sense of unconditional love for everything and everyone. They have
Even the wolves that are going to eat them?
Yes, they'll be unconditionally loving the wolf as it devours their entrails.
It might be it might be the case. It might be the case. I mean, look what happens if you.
Well, that's not very smart from a survival standpoint, is it?
If you consider that Jesus was a real person, then he got crucified for his.
Okay, hang on. We're getting off in left field. Jim, I think you're wanting to wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah. You have to leave in like 4 minutes, right, Jim?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to give you last plugs, final say, and then you can bounce, and then we're going to go around the horn, do plugs, and have a final say, a quick final say.
Okay, I just want to say thank you so much for letting me in on this conversation. It's been very interesting, but I'm kind of leaving this with the same mindset that there's nothing spiritual about it. There's no God concept to be reached, and to claim that I was expecting that to hear you say that this unified God concept to make this claim. And just the fact that people can have these different trips and come to different conclusions about God, just all the more lends credence to the fact that they are not connected, and just has to do with your own personal beliefs. For anybody who wants to follow me, you can follow me on YouTube at Disciple of Kairos. Lately, I've been tearing up Kent Hovind and his ridiculous stuff, so that's been really fun. You can follow me on Twitter at @DJimMajors. And again, thank you guys so much for having me.
And Jim Majors, Disciple of Kairos, that's criminally undersubscribed. Go to that channel as well and sub to that. So it's good content already. And you just started here recently, right? You've been on
I just started. I just cleared 100 subscribers, so just hit that first milestone. But I would love to be up a little bit higher. So thanks so much for that shout out.
The first 100 are the hardest to get. Everyone says it. Let's see who's next. Who's on there? RJ, plugs or any final thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can always plug my many things I do. I have 2 books out there that you can get at Amazon and for ebook formats. Evolution Slam Dunk, where I vaporize the creationist on the reptile mammal transition, and also a novel, The Paralogues of Phileas Fogg, that is a mystery science fiction retelling of Around the World in 80 Days. I'm currently working on the sequel of that, the second of the Paralogues novel series. And with Jackson Wheat, we're doing The Rocks Were There, which is going to do to Answers in Genesis what Slam Dunk did to the reptile mammal transition issue. We are vaporizing the whole slew of their various books in that, and we hope to have both of those out by the end of the year. I do Evolution Hour every Wednesday on YouTube. I've got a website which I put the link up for in the group chat. You can stick that in the main links. And I've got a Patreon and a GoFundMe. www.tortugan.wordpress.com. Troubles in Paradise, the Methodology of Creationism Project. And I've been trying to destroy creationism one source at a time and spread the gospel of source methods, which is follow the sources, damn it. You learn stuff and your arguments get better. So that kind of sums it up.
Who's next? Johnny DriveBye.
Well, I'm not so philosophical, but more on the science part of it. I think the neuroscience is getting better and we understand what it does. But I think it does. This is just an assertion. What I think it is, I think it's the same thing as an acquired savant syndrome. But I think your left brain doesn't get damaged. But in the syndrome, your brain does get damaged. So you keep on that. That's why you stay in that state. And that's what I think it is. But there, I don't think it's God.
Plugs.
My channel, Johnny DriveBye. I haven't really done anything in about 2 months, but I'm going to get back on it. So come on down and check it out.
DriveBye, BYE, not BY.
The lowly atheist carpenter.
Yep. Okay. Who's next? Lori?
Kafei.
Oh, Kafei.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, hey, man. I really appreciate the opportunity, man. I love this. I love hanging out with you guys. I wish I had a longer opportunity to hang out with you, RJ. And I know Jim said he was kind of disappointed that he contextualized these experiences. I would say to Jim that I really believe that the height of the mystical experience is universal, but it's filtered through the unique personality that makes it seem contextualized. And so, and I'm sorry, I had my son
right to the very end.
I apologize about that. Yeah. But I mean, I wanted to mention that, I mean, to Jim, I don't feel like I got to express everything I wanted to say about it, but I appreciate the opportunity. Y'all let me say a lot of interesting things about it. And another thing I wanted to add was I heard RJ talk about religion as a neotenous spandrel that is sustained as a scorched earth defense. And I wanted to really discuss that, but
I mean, we should do a whole hangout on that.
Oh man, I would love to, brother. I would love to. And one thing I'd like to add is I don't have any material for myself, or I have a channel. You can go to it. I have my recordings with the atheist experience of my call-ins. But what I wanted to really do was a channel called the Theist Experience, where I prioritize atheist callers to call in about the most profound concepts in philosophy, religion, all the science that's going on right now, everything that's relevant to these topics, and in a way that's professional, that a way that avoids all the mediocre arguments and just get to the meat of all these issues. And I don't know if y'all like that idea, man. I mean, man, support it, man. I mean, hype me up, and maybe I'm the first call. Maybe I can have some of you guys call in, and I can support you guys. So I don't know. Let me know. I that's what I want. I've been planning. I haven't got around to it yet, but in the meantime, I really enjoyed the discussion. I really enjoyed talking to y'all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we can always have you on if you got if you feel like we just hit the wave tops on this. Yeah. And what else? Oh, so that website, I mean, the YouTube channel, was it the Theist Experience? Is that how they search for it?
No. I would search my name. Just search Jimmy San Antonio or Atheist, Jimmy Atheist, Matt Delonte. You're gonna find it. I've had a lot of conversations with Matt and a lot of different hosts on the Atheist Experience. I've called in maybe like seven times.
No, but he's saying he was saying there was a separate channel called the Theist Experience.
Oh no, that's something I'm planning. I want to plan to. I haven't made it a reality yet, but I want to. And if I get enough people that are interested in that, I would definitely make it a reality.
Awesome. All right, Lori.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any plugs or anything. I'm always down for, good conversation or, trying to expand my worldview and try to understand things better. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation about it. And I would have probably liked to I feel like things were really kind of fluid and I don't feel like we got anywhere, but we really did try and, that's good. But I still kind of feel the same way. Like Jim said, I kind of feel the same way that went into it, that I can see where he's coming from. I can see how that experience could be, disembodying and all that. I just don't see that. I don't see the tie-in between that and for lack of a better word, a deity. So, but that's just where I stand. But yeah, thanks. And I want to, definitely tune in again.
Awesome. Chris, let's talk about your blog a little and any final thoughts.
I don't have any final thoughts. I mean, thanks for everyone for getting on. Thanks for Kafei for getting in, jumping the lion's den, as it were. I know it takes a lot of guts to do. For me, blog, sleepinginsundays.com, Twitter @sleepsundays, and apparently I'm going to be on a whole bunch of Atheist Edge videos coming up. We did about 8 hours of filming today, so
8 hours? We've done more than 8, haven't we?
11.
Oh my God. We've done 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 episodes before.
We're good for the year, basically.
So we're good for another month and a half at least. We're going to do more. TJ wants to do more live shows, so we're going to try to do more than one live show a month. Courtney, talk about women of deconversion and any final thoughts.
So final thoughts. I feel like I absolutely don't want Kafei to feel like he was ganged up on. I hope that wasn't the case, because honestly, it's really difficult to have these conversations, and it's difficult to nail down just definitions of what you mean by that. And I think the biggest thing that everybody in this community wants to do is to very accurately represent your perspective and your definition out of respect, so that we can actually see where we disagree. And that's where we were trying to get to. I think it's much too big of a topic to have gotten anywhere in this discussion. But I think in the future, I hope that we can revisit these topics, maybe just in smaller bites, because I don't want Kafei to feel disrespected anyway, because it can come off that way. And we absolutely, even if we don't respect all ideas, we definitely respect all people. So that's very important to.
I appreciate that. Thank you. You talked about smaller bites. Maybe we don't have to talk about it at all. Just take some bigger bites. No, I'm joking. I really appreciate the discussion. I love all the points you brought up, especially. It was an awesome experience. Jim, I know you're on a marathon right now. I really admired that, man. Keep it up, man. And you have my support, brother.
I'd hope we were going to be able to resolve whether hominids were druggies, but I guess we're not going to be able to do that.
I think it's pretty obvious that they were, man.
I feel like I was the sheep in the lion's den on that one. Everyone else was pretty much on your side on that. TJ, plugs, final thoughts.
Well, I thought, I may have incorrectly attributed something that you said to something that we were talking about earlier when I talked about the Lawrence Krauss thing. So if that was the case, I'm sorry. I didn't know that you hadn't spoken about it. But I just wanted to, it's if you can, my thing is if you can point to something objectively that we can verify in reality, let's talk about it. But this seems really some kind of hokey. I don't know. It's just me. I feel like it's not
the point of Eastern philosophy.
Me, I just always say abrasive shit, so I'm gonna say the abrasive thing and just be like, I don't feel
that's why we keep you around.
They keep me around to be the provocateur, right? So in the spirit of being the provocateur, I'm gonna say I didn't really find anything compelling in what you're arguing for.
Well, it's not like I can make you have a DMT through pure words over a screen on, through the internet.
We all do drugs at the same time.
Yes, we should. We should do a hangout where we all take LSD and just like.
I'll be down, man. I'll be down. As long as you take the heroic dose and you don't piddle, the dose. Go all out.
Go wrong.
I'm always willing to throw myself on the sacrificial altar of being the villain in any given situation.
Well, do me a favor, man. Look up.
I generally agree with you there. I'm all for that. I'll be the villain too.
As you are, there's a difference between attacking the person, attacking the idea.
No, and we
agreed.
Yeah, I didn't do so much attacking the person here. I tried to attack the ideas.
The ideas are fair game.
Yes, the ideas are fair.
Yeah, I will.
Well, look at my friend.
I think everybody loves that kind of fucking approach to things, right? Like, let's talk about the uncomfortable aspects of a conversation that we're having. Let's like dive into the uncomfortableness and the just like not wanting to discuss certain.
If you want to talk about uncomfortableness, look up my friend Kalindi Ii. He talks about what he calls the beyond heroic dose, man. That's 30 grams of psilocybin in one single sitting.
Yeah, damn. Yeah, wow.
And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it does just seem like maybe you've dropped a little too much. Like when it gets to that point, like
I haven't dropped enough. I assure you. I don't do this as often as you might think. I do it
once a year. He said once a year.
Yeah, very rarely. I do it very rarely.
Okay, so that wraps it up. We're right at the 2-hour mark on the dot. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to everyone watching. Thanks for that super chat, Jason. We're going to do more than one live show a month if TJ has some plans. So be looking for us in the future. We've got a basic idea for the June live show, but I don't want to give anything away yet until it's finalized, but it's going to be something pretty special. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
Bye, guys.
And that's where I should have ended, and I can't find my mouse cursor. There it is. Bye.